On immigration, sir, you said you would be sending the worst of the worst to Guantanamo Bay. What we're finding out is that there are a lot of low-risk migrants who don't have a criminal background who are also being sent. Are you thinking about this differently now?
No, they're going to be brought back to their countries. And with some persuasion, every one of those countries, everyone in the, as you know, every country is taking the people back. So some of them are going to be brought back to, many of them, any of them that are low risk, as you say, are going to be brought back to their countries.
I can only think of one person that could help me translate all of that from an immigration perspective. She's a friend of the pod, Lauren Villagran of Fantastic USA Today, national reporter that covers immigration. Lauren, it's so good to see you. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. All right. So, Lauren, I kind of want to get a little bit into what he just mentioned there, because it funnels into holistically your beat and covering immigration stories. We're going to get on into that story that you did on that family, Camila Munoz, who's now in a detention center. I want to get on that in just a bit. But first, 30,000 foot overview. Since the administration has started in January, what has the immigration beat look like for you? What are some of the stories that you have been covering, and what has been some of your focal points?
Yeah, in one word, busy. There's been a lot going on, as everyone knows, all your listeners know. I would say 30,000 feet, the most important shift we've seen right now is that illegal border crossings are down so low now that the vast majority of immigration coverage and immigration enforcement is really about interior enforcement. So to translate interior, that means, anywhere away from the US-Mexico border, in cities, towns, airports across the country. That's where we're seeing the focus turn.
All right, Lauren, I feel like over the last, I want to say 2 to 3 weeks, I now know what the Alien Enemies Act is, which no one knew what that was before 2 weeks ago. And now, is there an application for Tren de Agua? Because apparently that's one of the, I don't even know if I said that right, of these gangs. Let's go into each of these because they kind of intersect, because the president in that clip there was asked at the beginning of the segment here, he was asked about the separation between migrants that have just come here, or maybe they've lost TPS status, versus people that have actually committed crimes. And now there's been court mandates around this Alien Enemies Act that the Trump administration is fighting in courts. Can you kind of explain a little bit about what is happening, the flights that sent these prisoners to El Salvador? Can you kind of break this all down for us?
Okay. Mike, there was like 7 questions in that one.
I apologize for that. You know what? He gets 1 and he gives you 7 answers. I'm giving you 7 questions, so give me 1.
I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best to break it down. Okay, fundamentally, we're at a moment in American history in which the American people do not all agree what constitutes a crime. Okay, so when the reporter asks President Trump, we're seeing low-level criminals. We're not seeing the quote-unquote worst of the worst that were promised. What does that mean? We know that from about less than a year ago, 8 months ago, Republican congressional representative Tony Gonzalez of Texas asked ICE how many criminal illegal aliens are in the country that ICE should be targeting. And it was about 600,000 last July. So how does ICE, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the agency at the center of this immigration enforcement right now, how do they define criminal? I went out with ICE agents about a week before Trump took office, and I asked them that. We were in Northern Virginia. It was a sort of ride along where I went out with agents to watch how they target criminal illegal aliens and round them up. And it's a pretty incredible operation. It takes 6 to 8 agents, days, sometimes weeks of surveillance, because people can be dangerous, for them to target a single individual. ICE considers a criminal anyone who has an immigration violation, right? They may have removal orders or be removable, and who has committed a crime. That might be anything from a DUI to a violent crime. In the current administration, Mike, and we've heard White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt say it over and over again. Stephen Miller has said it over and over again. Anyone who has entered the country illegally or overstayed their visa is a criminal. So the scope of who is being targeted as a criminal is enormous now. It's not just the 600,000 with serious criminal charges or a criminal record. It's anyone who has an immigration violation. And what does that mean? An immigration violation, for example, crossing the border illegally is a federal misdemeanor the first time you do it. Overstaying your visa is a civil violation. Okay, in the past, we would not see someone with a visa overstay be labeled a criminal. They are now being labeled a criminal. We know that folks are in ICE detention with no more record than having overstayed their visa. So, the real answer to the question is, what's a criminal? And that definition is getting broader by the day.
Everybody wants cheap airfare, but where do you find it? You call low-cost airlines. They specialize in cheap flights, discount hotel rooms, cheap car rental rates, and with a best price guarantee. If you want the lowest prices on your airline tickets or other travel services, call now. That's right, call. That's the only way to get these rates. Experts are standing by 24/7 to get you the cheapest airfare and hotel rates available. So don't wait. Call now.
Yeah. This is why we have you on, because first off, you do ride-alongs, you cover this, intently, more so than the average person. So now I want to pivot, because there is a follow-up on that. And it's playing out with respect to these criminals that were sent to El Salvador in the prison. And it's all because of something that recently the border czar, Tom Homan, said on, I believe it was on Fox News. I want you to take a listen to this. I'm going to ask a question on the other side. So take a listen.
Every day, the men and women of ICE are going to be in the neighborhoods of this nation arresting criminal, illegal alien, public safety threats, and national security threats. Lawrence, you're not going to stop us. And we're going to make this country safe again. I'm proud to be a part of this administration. I don't care what the left thinks, we're coming.
You just faulted me for asking 7 questions in one. They say 7 different things that sometimes misalign. And we had Congressman Dan Goldman on the show a few weeks ago. And one of the things that he had mentioned was about this fear of defiance of court orders. Because once there's a defiance from the executive to the judicial, we tend to, break the Constitution and kind of like our 3 separate branches of government and the checks that they have. What is your take and your read on not only what he said, but the actions versus the words that are happening right now with this defiance of this court order? Should we be worried, as somebody who covers this all the time? Have you seen this? Is this normal? What's your take on it?
Yeah, defiance of court orders is not normal, I think, under any American circumstance. I've spent a lot of time working in Latin America and have seen the rise and fall of different types of governments. And when you see an executive defy the judicial, you're definitely in different territory than what we are accustomed to in the American democracy. When it comes to immigration enforcement and what border czar Tom Homan had to say, and when you see what happened with these Venezuelan men who have been accused of gang ties to Tren de Aragua, and for those who can't pronounce that, TDA is how it's called. I think it raises questions, and anyone should be worried that the U.S. government is jailing people without criminal charges. So an accusation in the American system is not enough to hold somebody in jail. And in the case of these men who were sent to El Salvador and who are going to be held in a Salvadoran jail, my understanding is that the majority of them do not have a criminal charge or conviction. And that raises enormous questions. Again, as immigrants, immigrants in the United States, even those who came in illegally, do have a right to due process. Attorneys will say that they do have a right to due process, even though the conditions under which they can be detained in the United States are looser than for a US citizen. We know right now that there are people being held in ICE detention for weeks already without any kind of charge or an understanding of their process, what's ahead, or a chance to see a judge. The system is pretty overwhelmed right now. But should Americans be concerned about that? Yeah, I do think so.
No, and you're right. And look, this is why, again, not to harp on why we had you on the show, but like these are norms. These are universally accepted things. These are laws, right? When we start to break some of these things, and I think there is, Nick and I have talked about this, that maybe it feels like, we're underwater a little bit because Trump brings with him this TV factor. Let's be honest. I'm going to do this. I'm going to say I'm going to do it. Then I don't do it. And now we're seeing it. We've just seen it in the clips that we've been playing. Some things are contradictory in terms of the action versus the words. Now, you've been talking about your coverage of the interior. Let's get into something in the interior because you wrote this great article, and I have two questions on this. I'm going to ask you the first one first, like a normal person. I want you to explain this article about Bradley Bartel and Camila Munoz, who were on vacation in Puerto Rico, in my home, and they came back, or they didn't come back to the U.S. because Camila is Peruvian and she got stopped by Customs Border Patrol. Can you kind of explain this story? And you did great work on this, but I want to ask you a follow-up at the end.
Sure. So we saw something that was a little unusual in the case of this couple, and I've spoken to several other women in a similar situation. Folks had, in the case of this couple, the woman overstayed her visa during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that, again, is a civil violation. There is a provision in US law that says if you are married to a US citizen and you are applying for status in the United States and you have a visa overstay in your past, that can be waived, that can be forgiven. It is not considered such a terrible violation that there isn't a way around it. On the other hand, there is also a provision for someone to be removed to their country, not deported, but just removed with an order to wait in their country for 3, 5, or 10 years. And that is typically determined by a judge. So, this couple is married, they put in their paperwork for legal permanent residency, and they went on their honeymoon in Puerto Rico. At the airport, on their way home, and just a reminder for listeners that Puerto Rico is a US territory, so this is a domestic flight. They were not outside the country. An agent of the federal government, and I'm not sure from which branch, was asking folks if they were a US citizen. When the wife said no, but I'm applying, she was whisked away, as were other women who were in a similar situation. And they have been detained by ICE for some weeks now.
It's a crazy story, and I encourage people go read it over on usatoday.com. Like I mentioned, you do fantastic work in terms of covering stories like this. But now I want to ask a question for my own edification, and it's something that, I've talked about this on some political panels, because if we do a story about somebody that was eaten by an alligator, where there was clear signs that said, there are alligators in here that will eat your arms, why are we giving that person the attention outside of the blood and gore of their arms being eaten? Why are we giving them the attention? Because the warning signs during the election, and this is not about a right or left leaning, this is about public messaging from both candidates. One person had signs in the crowd at the Republican National Convention that said, send everybody back, right? There was no clear delineation. And the other candidate didn't have something like that. So I'm not advocating for either candidate. What I'm saying is that these were clear warning signs for these folks. And now they're faced with the actions, right? With the consequences of their actions. Can you explain to me your thought process of, obviously you want to cover these type of stories. There are similar trends and patterns, but it's the alligator bit the person that was standing by the sign that said, don't go here, alligators will bite your arms. Why are we covering these type of stories, Lauren?
Well, I think that's a great question. I got a number of reader emails with a similar version of that, so you're onto something. Here's what I'll say. Let's go back to just a couple minutes ago when I was talking about how we cannot agree right now on who is a criminal. President Trump, then candidate Trump, was very clear throughout the campaign that he was going to launch a mass deportation. He also said that he was going to focus on criminals. So I would say that there are millions of Americans who voted for Trump. There are millions of Americans who didn't vote for Trump who can get behind the idea of deporting immigrants in the country illegally who have a criminal record or criminal charges. I think that there is actually broad agreement on that. What I think the folks who were affected in this particular sweep of the San Juan airport is that they didn't see their partner as a criminal, right? And to be fair, 4 or 6 months ago, their partner would not have been seen as a criminal. They would have been seen as someone with an administrative violation, something akin to a traffic ticket. Do you know what I mean? Like something that wasn't worthy of jail. Okay. I, as a journalist, am not here to defend anybody's actions, but my goal as a journalist is to bridge understanding, to show how a campaign promise can be translated into real life, into governance, and what that looks like and how that changes. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people who I can tell you from reader emails, the reactions to that story have run the gamut from uh, sympathizing to understanding that folks in this country don't understand how the immigration system works. It is incredibly complicated. Mike, there are immigration attorneys who specialize in just a very particular part of immigration law. It is so complicated. To folks like you who say, well, if the leopard said it was going to eat your face, why did you go with the leopard? To on the other extreme, people saying exactly, this is what we voted for. This is what we voted for. And so you can see in the range of those emails that Americans don't agree on what criminality is right now and who is worthy of or should be targeted for deportation. But what I can tell you is that when the border numbers go down, and the president of the United States has said, I am launching a mass deportation. I do believe that Americans should believe him because he is taking those steps.
Well, I'm in that middle category right here because the sign said it, you stood by it, the gator bit your arms. Either way, I'm going to read it. You should read it too. usatoday.com. Lauren Villagran, she's a national correspondent over there, covering immigration and the U.S.-Mexico border. Lauren, you know how much we love your work here. You know how much we love you. Thank you so much for hopping on the program. Continued success. Please stay safe.
Thanks, Mike.